Dad once looked me straight in the eye and said, "Your brother deserves everything. The house, the money, the entire company." And just like that, 15 years of my work vanished from my own life story. I walked away that night with nothing but my name and a promise I never said out loud. 2 years later, my phone buzzed. A message from the mother who'd barely spoken to me since. "The mortgage is past due. We need to talk." I thought it was desperation, but then the second message appeared. And that's when I realized the real secret wasn't about the house at all. It was about me. I wasn't always the man who could walk away from everything. For a long time, I was the one who stayed no matter how tightly the walls closed around me. I grew up as the eldest Hale son, the one who was supposed to set the example, carry the weight, keep the peace. My father never said those words directly, but he didn't have to. Expectations hung in our house like insulation, silent, everywhere, and impossible to ignore. I was a quiet kid, the kind who preferred fixing things in the garage to running around outside. When I was 8, I rebuilt a broken lawnmower from spare parts. When I was 10, I helped my grandfather replace a section of our porch. He clapped my shoulder afterward and said, "You've got hands that solve problems. Mike, you'll take this company places." He was the only person who ever said something like that out loud. My father, Dan Hale, was the kind of man who believed sons should be molded, not encouraged. Hard work was supposed to be its own reward. Recognition was something you got when you'd earned it, though the criteria for earning it changed depending on the day and the sun. My brother, Ethan, entered the world 3 years after me, and from the beginning, the air shifted around him. The jokes were funnier when he told them. The mistakes were smaller when he made them. And when he wanted something, the entire house seemed to lean toward him like a weather vane chasing the wind. The first time I noticed the imbalance, I was 12. My grandfather had the company crews build Ethan a custom play fort miniature siding. Tiny windows, even a small porch. It looked nicer than some starter homes. My birthday that year, a $25 bookstore gift card taped to a grocery store cake box. My mother patted my hand gently and said, "Your father just has traditional values. Boys need different things." I didn't have the language for it then, but even as a kid, I knew what she really meant. Ethan mattered more. That unspoken rule followed me into high school. I got straight A's. He scraped by. I helped my father on job sites during weekends. Ethan slept in until noon and showed up whenever he felt like it. And every time teachers, neighbors, or coaches praised me, Dad's answer was always the same: "Well, that's what older brothers are supposed to do." But when Ethan managed something average, something ordinary, Dad praised him like he'd reinvented the entire industry. By college, the path ahead of me felt predetermined. I studied business and construction management, worked through summers, interned with competitors to broaden my skills. I took every step a future leader should take. Ethan changed majors 3 times before settling on one that required the least amount of effort. When he graduated, Dad bought him a suit, shook his hand proudly, and said, "You're ready for the real world, son." When I graduated, he handed me a stack of forms and said, "We'll start you wherever we need help." I didn't complain. I told myself that starting at the bottom meant learning the whole operation. I learned estimating, scheduling, procurement, labor coordination. I walked sites in the rain, in the snow, in blistering July heat. I learned every foreman's name, their kids' names, their strengths, their frustrations. I learned who could fix anything with duct tape and who knew how to negotiate a delivery delay like a chess match. Meanwhile, Ethan walked into a furnished corner office, assigned assistants he didn't need, and a company truck he didn't know how to maintain. He wore the title of junior executive without once earning the weight behind it. Grandpa noticed. He'd pull me aside and say, "You're the spine of this place, Michael. Don't let anyone tell you different." His voice carried warmth, truth, and something else: worry. He knew favoritism wasn't just unfair, it was dangerous. He passed away the year I turned 25. And I felt something shift permanently in the house the day he was buried. Without him, Ethan's pedestal grew taller. Mine disappeared completely. The pattern got worse after that. My father relied on me for the hard decisions, the long nights, the complicated negotiations. But when clients complimented my work, he'd wave it off with a laugh must run in the Hale genes. When Ethan showed up late to meetings, Dad brushed it aside. He's still finding his rhythm. When I raised concerns about budget overruns tied to Ethan's choices, Dad's voice hardened instantly. Don't question your brother. Support him. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was erasure. The deeper I sank into the company, the more invisible I felt. My mother tried to smooth things over, but she always smoothed in Ethan's direction. When he forgot important documents or botched a meeting, she'd say, "He tries. He's sensitive." Whenever I pushed too hard or worked too much, she'd press her lips together and whisper, "Don't upset your father." But the truth was simple. I wasn't upsetting him. I just wasn't Ethan. Then came the medical complex project, the one that changed everything. When the schedule slipped and the budget ballooned, Ethan took an ill-timed 3-week vacation. I stepped in, organized the crews, renegotiated terms, fixed the workflow, and saved the job. The client shook my hand and said, "You saved this for us." Dad overheard, and all he said was, "The Hale men know how to deliver." Not Michael, not even my son. Just some vague credit directed toward a bloodline he believed only one of his children truly represented. Still, I stayed. Still, I tried. Still, I believed that loyalty, if I poured enough of myself into it, would eventually be seen. But manipulation works best when you're conditioned to accept it. And for years, I accepted the scraps they gave me as if I should be grateful for them. There was one person who consistently broke through the fog, my Aunt Lydia, my mother's older sister. She lived an hour away and visited on weekends. She'd pull me aside, tilt my chin gently, and say, "You're worth more than they see. Sweetheart, don't let them dim you to make someone else seem brighter." She was the only adult who didn't treat Ethan like a miracle and me like the support beam holding the miracle upright. She kept every award I earned pinned on her fridge. She came to my college graduation when my parents were late, and when Grandpa's health declined. She was the one who told me, "He believed in you until the end. Don't forget that." Her presence was the only early proof that something was wrong, deeply wrong with the way my family measured worth. But I ignored the signs, ignored my own exhaustion, ignored the ache of being needed for everything and valued for nothing. Because for most of my life, I thought if I just worked harder, if I was patient enough, loyal enough, useful enough, they'd eventually choose me. But families built on favoritism don't choose. They use. And I hadn't yet learned the difference. Pressure doesn't always arrive like a hammer. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, disguised as responsibility, disguised as just helping out, disguised as the role you were trained to accept without question. For me, it began with the small shifts no one else seemed to notice. Dad started calling me earlier in the mornings, then later at night. Then, during meetings I wasn't technically supposed to attend. His tone wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was entitled. As if every part of my life existed to absorb whatever the company couldn't handle. "Mike, stop by the Ridgeview site before you head in. Mike, the architect is pushing back, fix it. Mike, don't bother Ethan today. He's overwhelmed." Ethan wasn't overwhelmed. He was hungover. Again. But instead of confronting him, Dad changed the system around him, moving deadlines, reassigning tasks, quietly pushing more weight onto my shoulders. I carried it because that's what I'd always done. It was easier to suffer silently than navigate the fallout of refusing. Then the financial strain started. It began with a vendor's invoice marked urgent. Then a subcontractor calling to ask why payment was delayed. Then a quiet conversation between two foremen who didn't know I was within earshot, whispering that the company was burning cash faster than it could inhale. I brought it up to Dad. He waved the papers away. "Normal fluctuations. You're worrying too much." But the numbers didn't lie. The projects were slipping. Margins tightening. Overhead swelling. Someone was signing off on purchases that made no sense. Someone was mismanaging funds. and every attempt I made to get clarity was met with Dad's irritated dismissal. Stay in your lane. You don't see the full picture. We need unity, not criticism. Unity, in Dad's vocabulary, meant obedience, and criticism meant anything that didn't protect Ethan. Meanwhile, Ethan started showing up with new toys every month: watches, weekend trips, a motorcycle he couldn't ride without stalling it twice in the parking lot. He'd flash a grin and say, "Perks of being in charge." In charge of what? Exactly. Signing expense reports he didn't understand. The strain built quietly, but steadily. I felt it when long-term suppliers began asking for my personal assurance before extending credit. I felt it when employees came to me privately because Ethan had forgotten meetings or made decisions that contradicted policy. I felt it when my mother started sending "check on your brother" messages instead of "how are you" messages. And then came the breach, the first major one. A QC supervisor pulled me aside at the Timberwalk Hospital expansion. He handed me a list of structural adjustments Ethan had approved without consulting engineering. "You need to handle this, Mike," he whispered. "If this fails inspection, we're done." I fixed it. Hours on the phone, emergency crews, negotiations, all while Ethan posted a photo from a golf course with the caption "Building the Future." But I didn't say anything. Not yet. Because speaking up meant challenging the ecosystem that kept me trapped: Dad's blind loyalty, Mom's fragile peacekeeping, Ethan's inflated ego that could pop at the slightest resistance. So I swallowed it. I held the company together with duct tape and grit. And still, the cracks widened. Then Dad crossed a line one I'd never seen coming. It was a Wednesday afternoon when he walked into my office holding a proposal for a courthouse renovation. He tossed it onto my desk with the casualness of someone dropping off dry cleaning. "Ethan will be lead on this." I skimmed the first page. $20 million in scope. Complex timelines. Multi-phase regulatory reviews. Ethan couldn't successfully manage a catered lunch order, much less a courthouse. "This is a mistake," I said carefully. "He's not prepared. Let me oversee the schedule." Dad slammed a hand on the table. "Enough. Your brother needs space to grow. You always take over. You smother him. It's time he leads." I stared at him, stunned. Smother him? I'd spent years cleaning up his mistakes, shielding him from consequences my father refused to see. "Dad," I tried again, "the company can't absorb another delay." His voice sharpened. "Do as you're told." And there it was, the line. The one where concern for the business became an accusation against my loyalty. I felt something tighten in my chest. A thread pulled too hard for too long. But I still nodded. I still said, "Okay." Because that's what I'd been conditioned to do. But the universe has a way of punishing silence. 2 weeks later, Ethan botched the courthouse kickoff meeting so badly the county board demanded a new project lead. Dad blamed scheduling issues. Ethan blamed the team. Mom blamed stress. No one blamed the man who had caused it. Not even me, not out loud. Then came the email, the one that changed everything. A client forwarded me a series of financial discrepancies tied to Ethan's approvals. Overspending, unauthorized hiring, inflated vendor rates. And at the bottom, "If this continues, we'll drop Hale and Sons from our preferred contractor list." I brought it to Dad that evening. He didn't look at the papers. He didn't ask questions. He simply said, "You're making a mountain out of nothing. Stop attacking your brother." For the first time, I felt the ground tilt beneath me. This wasn't blindness. It wasn't tradition. It wasn't even favoritism anymore. It was willful destruction, and I was expected to help them light the match. I left his office realizing something I should have seen years earlier. They didn't value my silence. They depended on it. And the moment I stopped being quiet, everything they built would start to unravel. The moment everything snapped didn't look dramatic from the outside. No shouting. No disaster on a job site. No lawsuit landing on my desk. It happened in the conference room, the same room where I'd spent half my adult life earning a respect no one intended to give me. Dad had called a quick meeting. Ethan was already there, leaning back in his chair, spinning a pen like a bored teenager. Mom hovered near the door, wringing her hands in that familiar way she did whenever she knew something was about to go wrong, but pretended it wasn't. I sat down, already bracing myself. Dad cleared his throat. We've made a decision about the courthouse project. My jaw tightened. I'm assuming you want me to repair the damage. Ethan smirked. Actually, no. I'm taking over again. I laughed. A single stunned breath. Surely, they weren't serious. But Dad kept going. We spoke to the board. They've agreed to give Ethan another chance, provided he works under the guidance of leadership. And who? I asked slowly. Is leadership? Dad's eyes met mine, cold with conviction he did not deserve. Your brother. He'll act as interim CEO until we stabilize the company. For a second, I didn't understand the words. They tumbled past my ears. Meaningless. Until my brain finally caught up. You're making Ethan CEO. He needs responsibility. Dad snapped. You've always overshadowed him. This will force him to rise to the challenge. Overshadowed. The word hit like a punch. 15 years of sweat, sacrifice, and saving this place from their mistakes reduced to overshadowing. As if competence were a crime. As if incompetence deserved reward. Dad, I said quietly, the company isn't stable enough for this. Ethan can't manage complex. Ethan slammed his hands on the table. I'm sick of your attitude. Mike, you think you're smarter than everyone. You think you're the only one who can handle pressure. Guess what? This is my company. Dad knows it. Mom knows it. Everyone knows it. You were always just. He hesitated. Then delivered the blade. The backup plan. Mom gasped. But she didn't correct him. She never corrected him. And that was it. That was the moment the last thread snapped clean in my chest. Not because of the insult. Not even because of the title. But because I finally saw the truth. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't poor judgment. This was deliberate. They weren't choosing Ethan by accident. They were choosing him at my expense. Dad looked at me with a kind of resigned disappointment, the kind he used when I was a kid and didn't measure up to an expectation I never agreed to in the first place. We expect your full support, he said. The family needs unity more than ever. Unity. There was that word again, the leash they'd wrapped around my throat for decades. I closed the folder in front of me. It stood, and adjusted my jacket. No, I said. Dad blinked. No what? No. I won't support this. No. I won't fix another disaster you're pretending isn't coming. And no. I won't be part of a system designed to use me until I break. Ethan scoffed. Where do you think you're going? Anywhere but here. I walked out. Not angrily. Not defeated. Calm. Clear. Because in that moment, I finally understood. They hadn't pushed me into the shadows. I had been holding up their collapsing world with both hands. And when I let go, they would feel every inch of the fall. When I walked away from that conference room, I expected the guilt to follow the old familiar pull of responsibility. The voice in my head whispering that I owed them one more try. But for the first time in my life, there was only silence. Clean. Steady. Freeing. I didn't quit that day. I didn't scream or make a scene. I simply stopped showing up to do the job they'd never acknowledged I was doing. The next morning, my inbox exploded. A string of emails from Dad. Each more clipped than the last. A handful from Ethan. Ranging from smug to panicked in a 30-minute span. 3 missed calls from Mom. And then, buried in the chaos, a notification from our accounting software. A payment authorization request. Under my name. For over $180. 000. I frowned and opened the details. Vendor contracts. Lease renewals. Insurance policies. All of them tied to signatures I did not remember giving. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But the deeper I dug, the more horrifying the truth became. For years quietly, conveniently, Dad had shifted financial authority into my name. I was the primary on several critical accounts. My authorization guaranteed vendor renewals. My digital signature was attached to dozens of contracts Ethan had submitted. My credit. My liability. My reputation. Not theirs. Mine. And suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just favoritism. This wasn't just blindness. They'd built the company on Ethan's image and my responsibility. A slow, measured breath left my chest. Not rage. Not shock. Clarity. For the first time, I saw the leverage I never realized I had. I opened a blank email and began writing. No emotion. No explanations. No apologies. Subject notice of immediate freeze on all accounts under my authorization. Dear team, effective immediately. I am suspending authorization for all financial activities, including payments, credit extensions, vendor agreements, and operational expenses tied to my name. All pending contracts, renewals, or charges requiring my approval are hereby declined. Invoices must not be processed. New commitments must not be initiated. Should the company wish to proceed with any financial obligations, they will need to be transferred to an alternative authorized individual. Regards, Michael Hale. I read it once, twice, then hit send. The reaction was instant. Dad called within seconds. I declined. Then another call. Declined again. Finally, a text. We need to talk now. I typed back. Then talk to your CEO. 3 dots appeared. Vanished. Returned. Then, Michael, don't do this. You know the company depends on those accounts. My reply was simple. Not my problem anymore. I silenced the phone. That afternoon, I drove to see the one person whose opinion still mattered to me, Aunt Lydia. She opened her front door, eyes softening the moment she saw me. Well, she murmured. Looks like someone finally woke up. We talked at her kitchen table over chamomile tea. I told her everything, the contracts in my name, the meeting, the years of erasure. She didn't gasp or curse or look surprised. She just reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You've been carrying their consequences since you were a boy, she said. Let them carry their own. Her approval wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the anchor I didn't know I was waiting for. When I left her house, the transformation inside me was subtle but absolute, like a locked door that had finally clicked open. No anger, no revenge fantasy, just a simple understanding. I owed them nothing. They owed themselves everything. Over the next few days, I sent a series of calm, professional emails. One to vendors, informing them of the temporary freeze. One to HR, requesting a list of all employees hired or terminated without my approval. One to the bank, verifying transfers and confirming my sole right to revoke authorization. One to Dad, Ethan, and Mom, laying out a timeline of the company's outstanding liabilities, none of which I would be responsible for. Every message was cold, precise, and legally airtight. Ethan tried calling me 12 times. Dad tried to guilt me. Mom tried begging, but nothing they said shifted the clarity I'd gained. And then something unexpected happened. Employees, dozens of them, started reaching out privately. Not to ask for help, not to complain, to thank me for protecting their jobs when Ethan recklessly spent money, for fixing broken projects they weren't allowed to talk about, for being the one person who kept the company from falling apart long before anyone admitted it was collapsing. Their faith in me lit something inside, not pride. Exactly. Something steadier. A sense of identity I hadn't felt since my grandfather died. I wasn't the backup plan. I wasn't the shadow. I wasn't the support beam for a house that refused to protect me. I was the one who knew how to rebuild from the ground up. And whether my family realized it yet or not, the power had already shifted. Quietly, legally, unshakably. They had built their empire on my back. Now they would learn what happened when I finally stood up straight. The showdown didn't happen in the house, where everything fell apart. And it didn't happen in the conference room where they'd once crowned Ethan king. It happened in the last place any of us expected, the lobby of the Harborview Hotel. A glass tower overlooking the Boston waterfront. My father had insisted on neutral ground. I chose somewhere public. Neutral meant nothing. Public meant safety, a place where old habits couldn't corner me behind closed doors. When I walked in, the winter sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, scattering across polished marble like shards of ice. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, calmer, older, unrecognizable from the man who used to bend himself into knots for their approval. They were already there. Dad stood near the windows. Suit wrinkled. Tie crook. Pacing in tight circles. Mom sat in one of the armchairs, clutching her purse like it held her last breath. And Ethan, he lounged on the couch, scrolling through his phone, pretending not to notice the world burning around him. The moment he saw me, he sat up straight, eyes flashing something between panic and resentment. Dad didn't waste time. What the hell were you thinking? Freezing the accounts. Vendors are threatening lawsuits. Payroll is stalled. The bank's demanding an immediate review. That sounds like a CEO problem, I said, taking a seat. A slow, controlled statement. Not a question. Not an apology. Mom leaned forward. Michael. Sweetheart. Please. This has gone far enough. She still didn't understand. This wasn't far enough. This was the beginning. Ethan slammed his phone down. You're destroying everything out of spite. No, I said. I'm preventing you from burying the company completely. Dad's jaw tightened. We can't fix anything unless you reinstate your authorizations. Just sign, and we can move forward. I slid a folder onto the table. He reached for it, but a hand landed on top of his. A man stepped forward. Crisp suit. Leather briefcase. Rectangular glasses that reflected nothing. My attorney. Daniel Mercer. The best restructuring lawyer in the state. The same one my father once dismissed as a young guy who wouldn't last. Dad recoiled. Why is he here? Daniel set the briefcase down. Calm and clinical. Because Mr. Hale, your son, is not reinstating anything. In fact, he is here to present the formal findings of our audit. Ethan's face blanched. Audit? Yes. Daniel replied. Your CFO? He glanced at me briefly. A hint of satisfaction behind the professionalism authorized a full review of financial records associated with accounts under his name. What we found? He opened the folder, flipping it around so all three of them could see. Is catastrophic. Pages slid across the table. Unauthorized loans Ethan had signed. Vendor overpayments. Personal luxury expenses disguised as company development. Bank penalties triggered by missed payments. And the worst part, contracts, so poorly negotiated, they bordered on negligence. Mom covered her mouth, tears welling. Dad stared at the documents as if they were written in a language he'd never seen. Ethan pushed the pages away like they were poisonous. This is taken out of context. I didn't know. Dad didn't explain. I wasn't trained for. He kept grasping for excuses. And with each one, the truth became clearer. He had never wanted responsibility. He only wanted the title. Why didn't you come to me, Dad barked? Why didn't you tell me you were struggling? Ethan threw his hands up. Because every time I did, you said Mike would handle it. That was the first honest sentence he'd spoken in months. The air cracked open between us. Daniel continued, voice steady as of now. Your son holds controlling liability over debts he did not agree to incur. Fortunately, we've already filed a petition legally severing him from responsibility. Future liabilities incurred without his consent will be considered fraudulent. Dad's head snapped toward me. You went to a lawyer. I went to the truth. I said. Mom's voice was small. Michael, what do you want from us? I'd spent my whole life not knowing how to answer that question. Approval, respect, love. But now, the answer was simple. I want boundaries. Ethan scoffed. You're acting like you're above us. No. I replied quietly. I'm acting like someone who finally understands his worth. I pulled one more document from my jacket, the restructuring proposal I'd been refining for weeks. I'm offering a solution. One that keeps the company alive, saves the employees, and prevents bankruptcy. Dad's eyes flickered with something hope. Maybe. Or fear. What's the solution? You step down. I said. Ethan forfeits all executive authority. Mom is removed from the payroll. A professional management team takes over the Boston office. And I retain controlling ownership. Completely. Ethan exploded out of his seat. You can't do this. This is my legacy. You didn't build the legacy. I replied. You drained it. Dad's voice rose. This company has been in the Hale family for generations. And it still will be, I said, but under leadership capable of preserving it. Mom wiped her cheeks. And if we say no, Daniel closed the folder. Then bankruptcy proceedings begin Monday. And your son walks away untouched while the two of you face full liability. Silence. Cold. Thin. Suffocating silence. Dad really looked at me for the first time in years. His voice cracked. Michael, please, don't destroy what your grandfather built. My throat tightened. But I didn't waver. I'm not destroying it. I'm saving it. But I won't save it without saving myself in the process. He lowered himself into the chair, as if his bones had given up. Mom squeezed his hand. Ethan stared at me with pure disbelief. Like the world had shifted under his feet, and he was still searching for balance. Finally, Dad whispered, "Where do we sign?" I didn't smile. Victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like release. As they signed, one by one, a weight I had carried since childhood slipped off my shoulders. Not because they finally gave me power, but because I had taken it without asking. When the documents were done, Daniel packed his briefcase. Mom dabbed her eyes. Ethan stared at the table. Hollow. I stood. We're done here. Dad nodded slowly. Michael, I'm sorry. For everything. I paused. But only for a breath. I hear you, I said. But I'm not coming back home. And I walked out through the revolving doors. Into air that finally tasted like mine. Behind me, the family I once would have died to protect watched me leave. Ahead of me was a life I would build from the ground up this time, on my terms. In the weeks that followed, everything settled the way dust does after a demolition, slowly at first. Then all at once, the Hale family empire didn't collapse. It transformed. The restructuring team I'd brought in took control of the operations with a precision the company hadn't seen in decades. Budgets balanced. Timelines stabilized. Vendors returned cautious, but relieved. And the employees who had spent years walking on eggshells finally worked without fear of favoritism, sabotaging their efforts. My father stepped back quietly. A man who had finally run out of excuses. Mom stopped pretending everything was fine. And, for the first time in her life, sought therapy for the patterns she had spent years smoothing over. And Ethan, he unraveled before he rebuilt. Losing authority stripped away the illusions he'd hidden behind. Some days he raged. Some days he apologized. Some days he simply existed in a silence that felt like the truth catching up to him. But whether he changed or not was no longer my responsibility. That was the freedom I'd never known I needed. As for the company, Hale and Sons became Haleworks. A name that honored the history without carrying the weight of the ego attached to it. For the first time, the brand didn't feel like a cage. It felt like potential. I didn't stay in Boston to run it. I had no desire to live inside the ruins of my childhood. Instead, I hired a seasoned executive team, took a strategic advisory role, and flew back to Chicago, the city that had given me a life beyond the one my family tried to script for me. My apartment felt different when I returned. The skyline didn't look sharp anymore. It looked honest, welcoming, like a clean page waiting for a new story. Some evenings, I'd sit by the window, the same seat where I once questioned everything, and think about the boy I used to be, the one who believed loyalty guaranteed love, who bent until he nearly snapped. I wish he could see me now. I didn't win by taking power. I won by reclaiming myself, my future, my boundaries. If you've ever had to rebuild after being written out of your own story, know this: you're not broken. You're becoming. And if this journey meant something to you, stick around. There's more to tell. And I'd be honored to have you with me for whatever comes next.